Hi, friends. My name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People and a stalwart, one might say, of the self growth personality type community on YouTube. And as such, I'd like to address this question of self mastery, of personality type in general, and identity construction, uh, in part because there's an upcoming, apparently, documentary about it's sort of condemnatory of in at least some aspects of personality type, the type community that portrays it as somewhat cult like, I guess. I haven't seen the thing. This is what it's been expressed to me. It's relevant to my making this video. Whether I'm correct about it or not is another question. Uh, so I just wanted to say that this is also motivated by my being interviewed yesterday by a channel called The Art of Self Mastery, which made me start thinking about the term and the questions that it raises and its relevance to the typology community in general. So, first, let's say that point out that there's a couple of things implicit in the idea that one ought to develop one's skills in the art of self mastery. Namely, it assumes that either there's an optimal state of being to be attained that one has not yet attained, and one needs to do the legwork to attain it, or it assumes that there's something in the way of one's realizing one's fully mastered self that needs to be resolved, like some sort of barrier to success that needs to be removed. And it would seem to additionally ignore the fact that people are not never reach a state of complete equilibrium. There are moods, there's ups and downs. If I have completely mastered myself, am I always going to be happy? Am I always going to be in the same mood? Am I never going to experience failure? Am I just going to respond to that failure well? It's difficult to sort of narrow down exactly what comprises self mastery in that regard. Uh, just some observations. Models of self mastery. So one thing that he mentioned, and I heard somebody else say before, is I think I read it in a book and a novel that one of the characters applied this notion, which is, or perhaps I heard it from like a cop at a school assembly, to improve the self by just 1% every day. You know, if you do that, then you're twice as good in 100 days, I guess. Although I don't know if it's how it's probably it's probably complex interest. So the idea that you should improve the self by 1% every day is basically a way of saying keep in mind the ways in which you'd like to be different from how you are now, and try to make some sort of adjustment. It's also trying to say, don't hold yourself to too high of a standard that you're never going to be able to meet it. Don't expect yourself to get there overnight. Expect yourself to get from here to your goal by gradually improving bit by bit over time, and keep yourself accountable for progress, not perfection. So those are good messages in general, uh, expressed through this metaphor of uh, improve yourself by 1%. But of course, again, it's predicated on you having a clear goal, one way or the other. Either get rid of a problem or attain an outcome that's unattained that you'd like to see attained. Another way that people think about mastering the self is working on their cognitive functions. That's something that this individual mentioned as well. And my position on that is you have a configuration of attentional habits that plays out consistently in similar ways. So, for example, Rachel and I, until a little while ago, were watching the live stream that I just finished making. But as we were watching it, I came across this comment from Octavia Silva. OMG, horrible FI polar philosophy there. If you're constantly trying to change the external world to make up for your internal problems, you'll never be happy with any changes you make. Okay, so um, because what I had suggested to the individual is that a lot of self mastery really involves changing your circumstances to be more conducive to your nature. Octavia Silva finds that ridiculous because she assumes that her difficulties are of an emotional nature. She's an FI Dom, rather than assuming her difficulties are of a practical nature, which is what I assume. In other words, I put myself in a situation where I have too little autonomy because somebody else is bossing me around for unreasonable reasons or something. I need to get out of that situation. I think when I think of myself needing to be improved when I was in my last relationship, the way I needed to improve myself was to get out of that relationship. It was not my hurt feelings were not indicative of some unresolved issue within myself. They were indicative of the fact that I was dating someone who was constantly hurting my feelings on purpose. So that was the problem, not some sort of internal thing, right? When we talk about working on cognitive functions, though, it's important to remember that we do have these reflexes. So when watching that video, I reflexively started, opened up my record a video thing, getting ready to record, then realized I wanted to make a couple of notes. Went onto this notepad that has an ongoing. Every time I want to do something new, I just scroll down further, and I figured I'd have like 3 things, but then I realized I got more stuff. I forgot my little taxonomy, and so I had to write it all out. And it's different than what I originally thought when I was going to make the video. But the point is, instead of continuing to receive that video, instead of continuing to watch it and enjoy it on a reception level, I couldn't help myself. I just started acting, building off of it, acting, making new words again, because I'm an action type. So this is my nature. Now, you might say, okay, well, that's whatever, but if you're going to say, let's work on your cognitive functions other than your dominant function, Eric, then I would say, all right, what am I going to do? As I explained to the guy there, you can work on your 4th law function because you're aware consciously of the fact that you use it less than you optimally would. So you can work on it simply by making more time for it. However, you can also work on your 4th slot function by delegating it. The ability to delegate your 4th slot function, however, is very much dependent on what kind of function it is. It's easy to delegate SI. It's easy to delegate SE if you're rich. You can always pay someone to do shit for you. But it's not easy to delegate SE if you're not. It's easy to delegate SI because I can delegate it to Google Calendar. I can delegate it to my phone, looking at my phone periodically to remind myself of things. For example, I've delegated all memory of phone numbers to my phone. When I was a kid and we didn't have cell phones, I had everybody's phone number memorized. So, okay, that's an example of how you can work on your 4th law function. Note, you're not improving some sort of magical skill or whatever, where now I'm introvertedly sensing better. You're just either delegating it or affording it more time. It'll never be anything other than what it is. For me, that means it's primarily a thing that serves to feed my extroverted intuition, words from the past, ideas from the past, and sort of intellectual constructs that I've already constructed and retain. And it's much secondarily brush your teeth and take a bath. Nevertheless, it would serve me well to include more brush your teeth and take a bath. It would serve me well to spend, and I'm starting to do this, spend more time practicing the songs I already have than writing more new songs. So that's true, and it's worth noting, but it's not exactly working on your cognitive functions. Instead, it's working on the balance between your 1st and 4th. And it should also be noted that if you attain greater balance between your 1st and 4th, that means you're less optimized for what your specialty is. In other words, to the extent that you make your race car more usable as a street commuting car, it's less effective as a race car. So another model is, well, we're going to improve the self by being more productive. The thing is, of course, that's good. That's good in some sense and bad in some sense. For INTPs, INFPs, ENTPs even, and probably even the ENFPs to a certain extent, we feel fundamentally like we're not productive enough. And that you can always critique us on productivity and we'll feel like, But Is that a good thing that we've internalized that so much? I'm not sure. It's it's sort of generally accepted that it's better to do something meaningful than it is to just sit around all day fapping and playing video games. But is that actually the case? I mean, I went through a period of my life where I played a lot of video games, and I play almost none now. Is it the case that I would have been better off to have never played them? I don't think so. I think that's what I wanted to do then. And I allowed myself to do what I wanted. It is also the case, however, that easy gratification structure. If you structure your life too much for your own easy gratification, given your cognitive function configuration, then you may be doing yourself a disservice. So the next one, attain a desired outcome. Of course, if your idea of self mastery is to meet benchmarks, that's all well and good. But that assumes, number one, your benchmarks aren't going to change. In other words, your concept of self that you should be is correct. And number two, that you are goal oriented in some way. That you're willing to stay the course and follow this plan, even if new stuff comes up that seems like a better alternative to the plan. So it's very much within a TE frame that one would try to operate that way. It's difficult for an NTP to operate that way, to structure their self improvement through attaining desired outcomes. Uh, However, I should mention here that it is the case, for me anyway, that it's always desirable to get better at something that's a demonstrable skill, like playing the guitar, for example. And I feel satisfied by improving, even if I'm not where I think I'd like to be in a skill like that. That's a little bit, quite a bit different than cognitive function, right? It's a specific externalized skill. Uh, Number five, reach enlightenment. So, the Eastern traditions, they suggest that one engages in processes of self growth to reach enlightenment. This seems silly to me because if you look at who purportedly is enlightened, they have a kind of steady, serene, glow, kind of unshakability to them that conveys slightly a transhuman kind of knowledge. But first of all, they're not transhuman, they're just regular people. And second of all, this purported knowledge they have, if in fact it puts them in a state of perpetual calm knowingness, then it seems they're far too detached from life. Because in reality, we do have circumstances that require various forms of action, both non normative, which is to say just maybe prescriptive, like do I want to dig a vegetable garden or do I want to watch football? And ones that are normative. So, what ought I do to improve the world, if anything, and what definitely ought I not do? Sitting around smugly knowing the oneness of things is, in my mind, not a desirable outcome. So, if that's enlightenment, you can have it. Number six, attain sagehood, guru clarity. That's just people wanting to be the one asked the questions and to the one being perceived as smart and wise and whatever. Um, Let me tell you, it comes along always with a bunch of people saying, you're not smart, you're not a guru, you're not a sage. So, like, who do I like to shit on a lot? Eckhart Tolle. Why? Because he's carrying himself like he knows something, but you're not fooling me, motherfucker. Uh, and of course, I get a lot of hate too, because some people would afford to me that kind of, well, he's really wise, he really that. I prefer to think that I'm not so much wise as I am correct. Uh, it's like, and you can be too, and it's not anything magical about it. It's like, uh, if you're correct and you've taken a path of being objectively self-critical and saying, okay, I'm going to be honest with myself about everything, and just if I'm wrong, I'm going to go, yeah, I'm wrong. If I do shitty stuff, I'm going to stop doing it. If people are being shitty to me, even though I'm not doing shitty stuff, I'm not going to put up with it. You just be correct. then that's just choosing not to lie to yourself and or others. It's not sagehood or guru or whatever. I do have a lot of knowledge, information, but that comes from being a debate coach, not from self growth or anything. Being a debate coach means you have to have very broad research and to be very good at picking out the only important parts, which are the justifications. Self concept. So the other thing about this self mastery thing is it implies a self concept where the identity is subject to your will, and it is appropriate or prescriptively good for you to apply your will to your own self. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I definitely don't disagree that it's a good idea to do so. I think that the subject is probably less susceptible to willful change for some people than for others. So the more removed you are from SI, I think the more plausible it is for you to turn over a new leaf. The higher up SI is, the more of a challenge that proves because you are more of an extension of what's come before. In the NI self-concept, the identity links to hours loosely. The whole idea that you could work on a cognitive function that's not conscious, for example. I'm going to work on my FI. Ignores the fact that you have a finite number of hours in the day to pay attention in certain ways. If you allow yourself to simply naturally pay attention as you do, you're going to be taking your optimal function approach towards a problem. Now, whether or not that problem is a good problem for you to use your optimal function approach on is a separate question. So it might very well be a good idea to practice or sort of work on your cognitive functions in the following sense, that you work on noting when a circumstance is not conducive to your native way and either deferring to somebody else or probably the best case scenario is you reduce the amount of reflexive faith you have in your own reflexive approach. So what number am I on? Oh, number 3. The current self is inadequate in some way. Self-mastery also assumes that there's something wrong with you, right? I need to fix this problem. Now, you could say, no, that's not what mastery means. But if, in fact, I attain self-mastery and I become the master, who is the slave? Is it me? Am I both master and slave at that point? The whole idea of self-mastery is that there's an identity directing the self to manifest the self-concept that the identity prescribes. So it's predicated on what sometimes people call the single self illusion. I wouldn't call it an illusion at all, but more like the single self necessity. The necessity for us to operate as though there was an individual self that was the driver and other individual selves that are operants in some sense. Okay, but the idea that the current self is inadequate in some way is it seems to be underlying the idea of self-growth in general, that you need to grow. You're not grown yet. And I don't dispute the fact that I'm not grown yet. And so it's a complicated question for me, because I also assert, in no uncertain terms, as a general rule, there is nothing wrong with you. And the number one thing that's wrong with you is you don't believe that there's nothing wrong with you. You've internalized some notions that there's something wrong with you. However, the reality is, a lot of times there is something wrong with somebody. Like, there was something wrong with Rachel. She had bipolar mania. And now that we've got her the right medication, it's basically cured, or dormant, or whatever you want to call it. She's fine, but there was something that needed to be fixed. When I was a drunk, there was something wrong with me. I was a drunk. I needed to quit drinking alcohol. So it's not always the case that there's nothing wrong with you. And yet it's also the case that a lot of the reasons why we think we need to grow or become better versions of ourselves or something is because we've internalized that there's something wrong with us, when really it's just other people projecting their function biases onto us as condemnation of us in some fashion. Okay, now the other thing about this self-mastery thing is it's a model of self-concept that assumes there's a positive moral indication to improve. So even if maybe you don't think there is anything wrong with you, well, you still have an obligation to get better. Well, the thing is that therefore that basically conveys that the improvement of self comprises development of skills of being, which is an odd thing to think, right? Like, so since cognitive functions are attentional manners, they're ways of being, they're not skills. It makes perfectly good sense to say the improvement of self comprises development of skills like playing the guitar better. Myself is improved because now I play the guitar better than I used to. Myself is improved because now I understand cognitive functions better than I used to. Okay, that's fine. But when you say myself is better because I improved the skills that comprise being, it needs some other frame to concretize it, right? Otherwise, it just sort of floats there meaningless. All right, and the last little chunk here, alt loci. So as I mentioned, let's go back to Octavia's comment. Oh my God, horrible epipolar philosophy there. If you're constantly trying to change the external to make up for your internal problems, you'll never be happy with any changes you make. So, that's true probably for people with damage. You know, if you're damaged and you keep lashing out at people and you keep trying to fix the problem by changing the people you lash out at, you're never going to accomplish the outcome you're looking for, which is being okay in your own skin, basically. But it's definitely not the case for me that if there's a problem that is necessarily inside of me, generally if there's a problem, it's the other person, I assume, right? I mean, maybe that's just, I guess, bias in favor of myself, but I try to be honest, objective, fair, all the various things. So if I'm having problems, I operate under the basic assumption that it's the other person, not me. I don't have problems normally just that are unrelated to other people or other circumstances, independent of those. They're always linked to something like that. And then my examples. Did I give my examples already? Well, my example is Kimberly, right? That I was in that relationship for a long time. It was a lot of problems. I was having internal emotional problems. But the thing that needed to happen was I needed to dump that woman because she was causing me to have those emotional problems. She was not revealing problems that were implicit in me. She was intentionally hurting my feelings over and over again. That's why I kept having this problem called having my feelings hurt. So obviously the solution was to change the externals, not to change myself. And the relevance to the topic question. So these things are all relevant to the question of self-mastery, but this last bit, the alts or the loci, my alt to self-mastery is one that says, I try to optimally be aware of my own reflexive habits, and I try to be aware of when I'm not a good candidate for a given kind of thing. So that's something that comes late. As an ENTP, I'm not sure to what extent this is true of also ESTPs or ESFPs or ENFPs, but for an ENTP, it's definitely the case that I spent my life assuming that things were, basically living Dunning-Kruger. Assuming whatever it was, I'm sure I could figure it out. It would be called a Dunning-Kruger of somebody who's found it easy to figure things out versus the kind of Dunning-Kruger of people who don't have a sense of what figuring stuff out is like. Regardless, I now recognize okay, this is the kind of thing that requires a different skill set than mine. And this is the kind of thing that's appropriate for my skill set. One of the things that frustrates people in dealing with me is I'm I sit here exclusively in this area where my skill set has predominance. And then people with different skill sets come in and try to compete on my field, in my skill set, and lose and get frustrated and angry at me. The point is, I purposefully limited my range of argumentational stuff and my approach to the topic and everything I say. The platform itself is structured to allow me to avoid all the parts of the thing that I don't like. Namely, well, where's your empirics, Eric? This is just armchair philosophy. Well, yeah, it is just armchair philosophy. But that assumes that there's not some sort of range of quality within armchair philosophy. This is incredibly accomplished armchair philosophy. And most examples that would try to attain what I'm doing here fall miles and miles and miles, categorically short rather than just, I guess, quantitatively short. So the thing is, what did you take away from this? Well, if you let somebody thrive in an environment that allows them to excise all aspects of their attentional habits except those that they're most comfortable with, then they'll kick all kinds of ass, but they won't change much. Not a lot of self-growth. So does that mean they're failing to attain self-mastery? Well, it depends how you want to frame the question. If you're framing the question through always developing is necessary part of self-growth, then the answer is no, you need to always challenge yourself and move forward. If the answer is you're trying to attain a life in which the world and you are in harmony, in other words, you're not getting pushed back against your very being simply because of who you are, as everybody does for much of their life, then attaining that place that I just described is the ideal goal. Regardless, I think it's a mistake to think of the individual as this static thing and not factor in the hours, and to consider that if you can just master all 8 cognitive functions, then you'll be some sort of attentional god or something. It's an insane miscomprehension of the way things work and the nature of attentional matters being fundamentally built on mechanisms of exclusivity, proportionality, inverse proportionality, and so forth. And so with that extended outro that I'm sure few of you sat through, I will draw this video to a close and bid you all a very fond typological adieu.